Welcome, welcome, welcome to another episode of the Lords of Consciousness videocast. I am your host, Clint-culberson, coming to you from the sunny deserts of Arizona. And today I am joined by a good friend of mine, Kellyanne Thomas, down there in Nicaragua. She's been living down there for... How long have you been living down there, Kelly?
13 years.
13 years. And I've been really excited to have you on. We've tried it before and the internet didn't work, but the internet gods seem to be helping us today. So while we can do this, we'll try to get this in. And I wanted to have you on because you are living in a country where a lot of upheaval is kind of taking place right now. There's mass protests going on throughout the country. If I understand it correctly, the president-ortega had put some bill out that was causing, basically stealing the pensions of the people, of the workers in their country, and people are revolting. So, and the police are retaliating and have killed dozens of people already. So, and again, I'm only getting this from what I see online, Al Jazeera, most of the American media doesn't even cover it. Can you kind of give us an update on what's happening down there and what is this stemming from?
Well, it started, the protest started from the IMF coming in and demanding changes in our pension fund. The pension fund is bankrupt, and the IMF has been using our pension fund to make sure that there is enough cash for Nicaragua to repay all the loans from the IMF and the World Bank. And the pension fund has been looted by many of the politicians. There's not a lot of transparency, so we don't know actually where the money went, who controlled it. We have our president has set up a company called Albanesa. So a lot of our foreign aid and loans, like from Venezuela, instead of going directly to our treasury, went through Albanesa, and then he took that money from Albanesa and gave it to the Nicaraguan treasury. So it's a little bit confusing, but in reality, the problem is that we have no money, that the government has spent more than and has not saved any and invested this. And the IMF came in with some really harsh recommendations. And the president Ortega could not go to those extremes, but he did want to decrease the pension by 5% for the current payouts and increase the employee and employer contributions, which are already close to almost 25% as it is combined. So it's a pretty hefty payroll tax. And because there's no... we also have a problem with the IMF coming in, and our currency is automatically devalued every year 5% against the dollar. There are only 3 countries where this has ever happened, and it destroys our economy. So we can't have any sovereignty. We can't actually save money. So when you have this 5% loss of currency every year, coupled with a 5% reduction in the pension, that actually makes it to be a 10% deduction in the pension. So the people protested, the pensioners protested, and President Ortega unleashed the police because he couldn't deal with these protests coming up. And it started with just a few people being injured and then killed by the police. And then over the weekend, the next thing we know, we have, I believe it's 68 people have died so far. And we have, I think it's 20 people are still missing, and well over 100 major injuries from the police, from having guns bashed in your face. It's just brutal. So the president has decided that for now, he's just going to table this and we're not going to do anything, but we're in an impasse. And because it's been it's a strange country, because it's a dictatorship, but yet everything has worked very well for most people. for the last several years. We have more tourism, we have more foreign investment, more people are coming to Nicaragua and building homes, and more foreigners are moving here. And so, you know, everything's been moving up, so people sort of overlook the bad things. And so the government was prepared for this backlash and of resentment, this simmering resentment that people have had here for well over a decade. So right now we're at this, we have it so the students are still protesting right now, trying to keep the momentum up. People are demanding the resignation of the Ortegas. The Ortegas have no plans to leave, and we have a power vacuum because there's nobody to come in and step in and take over. And the problem is that nobody really understands economics and how the IMF works, and they don't know the history of like Confessions of an Economic Hitman and the true scope of what the IMF has done to countries around the world. So anybody who wants to come in and take over has to figure out how we're going to pay for all this. How are we going to have sovereignty for currency? How are we going to attract foreign investment with now everybody's scared? My friends have reported that everybody's losing their reservations to their hotels and their B&Bs and houses and canceling vacations here because they're very worried about the violence. Although the violence had nothing to do with foreigners and was never directed at foreigners.
Wow, man, that's just unbelievable. And it looks like another example of the economic gangsterism that institutions like the World Bank and the IMF have been inflicting upon the world. I mean, not just poor countries, but especially poor countries in the way that they operate. And I kind of wanted you to touch on a little more of that in terms of how Nicaragua and what's happening right now is a microcosm of the macrocosm.
Well, it's because you said it's happening in Argentina, it's happening in Venezuela, it's happening in Ecuador. We have, I don't know, is it $250 trillion in debt? And that's not even including the derivative bubbles, the quadrillions. And the IMF has just come out and said, well, there's too much debt in the world, so what do we do? But they're the ones who created it. So the IMF essentially for the entire economic system, they print out money, they lend it to a country, then they sell bonds from that country's debt to somebody else, and then they print out more money so those people can buy the bonds and borrow it. And so it's just turned into this every single country is in debt to the IMF. And through the IMF, the problem is that, as we saw in Argentina, they nationalize, they collateralize resources, the natural resources. So, you know, our water, our gold mines, our coffee plantation, even sometimes the labor. And so when a country defaults on its debt, then the IMF allows their foreign bondholders, all the big banks and corporations, to come in and clean up. They either control these resources, or they, as in the case of Argentina, pay 15% of the value of a corporation of the resource, and then own that full resource. So what we're seeing around the world, what we're seeing in Nicaragua is very interesting. Like, people are speaking out and they realize what's happening, and no one knows exactly what to do, but all over Latin America, we see what's happening. And it's interesting because throughout all of this, all these people, my friends from the States, keep writing in and saying, oh, well, we feel it too. We have this discontent. We've got a dictatorship, which isn't really a dictatorship, but it's so different. Whereas Nicaraguans actually came out and did something, despite knowing that the police were going to shoot at them. The next day, like after the first round of deaths, protesters came out and they wrote their names on their arms with their telephone numbers in permanent marker in case something happened, so they could identify the bodies. And I look at the United States and I think, wow, like, nobody would do that. Like, it's very different. So when everything I believe that sometime this year the markets are going to collapse, and I think that over the next 2 years, I don't know what's happening geopolitically. You know, now that North Korea and South Korea want to reunite and denuclearize, and that takes that stress off. But now you don't have the military-industrial complex being able to control that and sell weapons there. So they need to make up for it somewhere. So I don't know what's going to happen in, say, Syria or Iran or any other nation. But something's going to happen, and then what happens, because we're such a global economy, and we don't know what is going to we don't have anybody who can lead a global economy. We're in a corporatocracy right now, and we are dependent upon oil for everything. And we can talk about solar and renewables, and all of that is great. But the reality is all of our nuclear power plants around the world require 24/7 energy, and they require reserves, diesel, gasoline reserves in case something happens, or we'll have a Fukushima. And if we do not have a stable currency that can be traded around the world, then we have this. Then we have a problem with the oil flowing, and it's not just the drilling and the transporting of the tankers and putting it into the pipelines and bringing it into the power plants and supplying the grid. It's a very complicated system, and we're really enslaved to oil, and we just don't know it. And so this becomes the biggest problem of everything, is how countries are going to be able to manage their currency so that we have trade, so that we can make everything continue to work, so the whole world doesn't melt down.
Yeah, and you and me were talking about how these uprisings are happening all over the world, and that there is like a simmering that's starting to take place everywhere, and a lot of that is really just a byproduct of the system breaking down, and that the corruption has almost just gotten so out of control that now their own numbers don't even make sense. Like they're basically this global economic system it's a game over system. There's more debt than there are currency in the world by like 3 times. So I mean, it's kind of just it's become irrelevant in many ways. And obviously they know about this. And I think a lot of people, even if you and me are talking about it, and more people are starting to see it, then that the people up at the top they know. And I'm sure there's some sort of transition that's coming our way, and who's going to be in control of that is going to be the real interesting question. If there really is some sort of revolution happening behind the scenes within the system, then that would be wonderful. I mean, I can't bank on it, but I think what you're doing in Nicaragua is it's just a perfect solution for what's happening in the world right now in terms of the old paradigm dying. And you've realized with your work in Harmonia, which we'll get into right now, that we need to regain some skills that we've lost, and that our dependence on this modern system of money, cash, oil, the whole deal is a real sketchy. It's a sketchy predicament that our species is in, because the guys controlling that are a bunch of maniacs. So we have to start realizing that and start to become interdependent on our own. I mean, it seems very obvious that's what the writing's on the wall. And if you're going to depend on the system to take care of you, you could be in trouble. And maybe not. Maybe this is going to be a more delicate transition, and there really are some great people that are going to eventually, create a currency reset. We can get rid of these institutions that are vampiring the whole world. But it's just, I mean, Kelly, you've been following this a long time. I mean, do you have faith that change can happen at the top?
it needs a violent revolution to remove it from the top. The wealthiest people have armed themselves to the teeth. They have underground bunkers. They're everything they do shows that they have no intention of protecting the planet. They don't care. They continue to pollute. They continue to create these issues. And so many of them, the elite, talk about the importance of depopulation. And that is the purpose of war most of the time, and it has been for years, centuries at least, is when you have too many people, like you just have a war, eliminate them, and then you start to move up. That's what happened with the Iran-Iraq war years ago. Both sides should have ended a year before that, but oil was $13 a barrel and they had no natural resources. So Iran and Iraq could not feed their countries. So it was easier to let them, a million, die each way. And that's what we see in the United States, like, with the cancer rates. Nobody's doing anything about, like, talking about, well, why are we getting cancer? What environmental things are causing it? What health things? We don't. Oh, sorry to deviate, but I mean, like, speaking of health, like, health is in the United States is considered an industry, but in reality, it's a negative impact. Every bit of money you spend on healthcare for healthcare to be an industry requires more and more people to get sick, which means fewer and fewer people are actually out there contributing to society, and you're wasting all of this money just to get yourself back to this level. And so we're not thinking about how to make our population stronger and healthier so that they're more productive and happy. We're just thinking like, well, we need to make them sicker, and more cancer clinics are opening, and never find a cancer doctor who wants a cure for cancer because they're out of business. This is our medical industry too. So we're having I'm sorry, like, I feel so bad. I have so many different things going through my head.
Oh, it's okay.
The whole economic hitman last night, and I was looking at the Argentina documentary, what happened, and woke up this morning thinking protests, and it's just very frustrating what's happening in the world right now, because while people see that we need to change something, and there's this simmering, nobody's putting a lot of thought into, like, what happens when you have a revolution? What happens in the United States if, you vote everybody out and imagine that the voting system is perfect and you get all the people that everybody wants in there? Then what? I mean, you're still stuck with what do you do?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah, and I worry about solutions being created from a faulty programming or really a misunderstanding of where the problem's even sourced from. It's kind of, even with our website, I initially thought, well, shoot, I'll create a website, we'll just focus on the solutions. Until I realized that if we don't understand what the problems are, I just felt like the solutions then become something where you incorporate the system into it, even though unrealizing how, dare I say, even demonic some of it is. And our participation in it is kind of, we participate out of ignorance, especially in the Western world. We're in the United States, we've greatly benefited from this economic gangsterism at the expense of other countries, including Central America. That these countries have been, in a sense, financing, well, not only the wealthy, but even the the Western countries, in which it seems like part of their agenda has been to allow some of the countries to have a greater prosperity, and then distract them with tons of entertainment, so they don't know what the heck's going on in the world. So it's like a really fascinating history that has taken place. And from your perspective, since you've been all around the world, you've really had such amazing life experiences, touching in these places, whether that be first world or the third world countries. how has the Central American experience for you been in terms of just putting it into perspective into the whole world, really?
One of the most interesting things was when I moved to Nicaragua. It's the second poorest country in the hemisphere, second only to Haiti. And I went down there to make a difference. And so, like, in my coffee house bookstore, I didn't serve takeout cups, no to-go cups. And I tried to buy used books from the States. I used to make everything cheaper. And I paid my employees really well and tried to do the right thing. And so we'd have all these people coming like, oh, I want to come help Nicaraguans. And then they get a bill for $1.50 for their coffee, which includes free refills. And then they go on TripAdvisor and complain about the outrageous price for organic coffee and in a socially responsible business. They feel like they're getting ripped off. And that is that attitude is so prevalent all throughout South America. It's interesting the way the first world operates. They think that they want to help, but in the end, they don't actually want to pay the price for fair trade. And now we're looking at in the coffee industry here, we lost a lot of production this year because we can't find enough people to actually pick the beans, because the government has our wages here, the minimum wage for a bartender, a cook, or a waiter is 3 times the wage of what it is for somebody who picks vegetables. And that's wrong. And that has also been a problem with the government here, but because there's just so much competition. And as we know, like from Honduras in 2009, the coup there was from Dole and Chiquita, and they were worried that Honduras was going to raise the minimum wages, so they had to get rid of that, because if they raised those wages, then everybody else was going to raise their wages, and their products are going to become a little more expensive, and people are like, well, do we really need a banana? And it all comes down to money. And I noticed that even though in the United States, it's the same way. Everybody talks about wanting to support private businesses, and they're all against Walmart. But when it comes down to it, they would rather be able to have a bunch more stuff at a cheap price than fewer goods at a fair price. And then they complain when everything falls apart.
Yeah, it's and I've seen it in my own life, so I can totally attest to what you're saying. I do believe, we are addicted to cheap prices in this country, in the United States. We're addicted to everything needs to be convenient as could be, 24/7, 7 days a week, the whole thing. We want it now, and it's like we've become these spoiled brats, in some ways, unrealizing that. Agricultural subsidies that have artificially kept the price of food at cheap rates, and then when we're importing from places like where you live in Mexico and where it's not at all a fair economy, and especially when you consider how we border these places and the disparity that are between them. And I mean, I'm in the agricultural world selling local produce here in Arizona, and I definitely run up against that. Now, I mean, I am grateful that there is a movement that is happening where people are willing to spend, top dollar for organic produce, locally grown, and supporting these farmers in order for more farmers to come about at a local level. And I think it's it's something it's growing. Is it growing quick enough? No, but I think probably you and me are probably pretty impatient for change. We see the writing on the wall, and we just say, let's do it. Come on, let's make it happen. But when it comes to humanity, it's like I always say, it's like turning around a cruise ship, man. It's a slow, tedious process, and it's something we all have to be patient. Us people like us who are seeing the truth and who are wanting this change. We are definitely getting a nice lesson in patience. And even I had talked to you about this, how these protests are actually a really essential part of this process. That what's seemingly going wrong with the world is really just to me the death rolls of this old system. I mean, it's like packing a dangerous animal in a corner. There's gonna be some reactions and crazy stuff that takes place before you can subdue them. And I really do believe that we're getting there. And I think this whole, you had mentioned it about the economy falling apart, and I think that really will be the linchpin of how this all goes down, and an opportunity for humanity to take back control again, and refuse to take part in any system that tries to control again. And that's why what our discussion right now about what the IMF really is and what the World Bank really is so vital, so that we do not fall into any more traps of this consolidated power that we see, and must stop.